Cool. So I'm just going to give a super brief introduction, chat here called The BlueStack Gives Me Anything But. That was a really clever title I came up with in like, I don't know, a couple minutes. It was good. So who am I? Like Brooke said, my name is John Harrell. I'm a senior developer advocate at Prisma, Prisma Data, however you want to call it. Previous to that, I was a backend engineer. Previous to that, in the good old days of jQuery, I was a full stack engineer. And then I very quickly learned that's not what I wanted to do. So past 8 years, been backend engineer. About a month ago, I was very fortunate to start as a developer advocate at Prisma. And that's all well and good. But like, why am I here? And that I need friends. But no, actually, it's all about a talk that Brooks gave at RemixConf. I'm sure you are all aware of this talk, but if you haven't watched it, please do. It was really great. And it was all about community. And what really spoke to me was the idea that it does not matter where you start with a community, that you do. So, get out there, get something started and see where it goes. And I think that that idea of community works really well in the open source space, in lots of other spaces too, but especially in the open source space. I represent Prisma. I'm a part of Prisma. Y'all represent your various companies and groups, and you're part of Remix. That does not mean that we are we are different communities. We are like the same open source community, and we're working together to help develop some really awesome software. So really, I'm here because of advocacy. Yay, it's in my title. It's something that I get to do every single day. I love being a developer advocate, and I love, bringing cool things that are going on at Prisma to y'all. And I love taking what y'all are doing and bring it back to Prisma. Without the wider developer community, I would not have a job. So thank you. I really appreciate it. More on that. I'm going to be, attending these Remix meetups as much as I possibly can. So please do consider me as your local developer advocate, or your local dev avocado, as we're known, it seems. I'm more than happy to answer any and all questions you have. Sometimes I will be saying like, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. Please understand, I wish I could, I just can't. Yeah, I think that's basically about it. Brooks, I don't know if it's cool if I answer questions while I'm up here, but I'm more than happy to. And if you ever want to get in contact with me, J Harrell on GitHub, John B. Harrell on Twitter, and Harrell at Prisma.io is my direct work email. So feel free to hit me up. And if you have any questions, I can answer them now. If not, it's totally cool. I will be around.
So I've been using the Edge version of Prisma for Cell. I saw that there's a new JSON feature. I was wondering what that was about. I just thought it was related to Edge in some way.
Yeah, sort of. How in depth do you want me to go? So the JSON protocol, which I believe is what you're talking about. So the way that Prisma works, for better or for worse, is that there's the client, which is like the Node library that everyone knows. And then there's the query engine, which is like this spooky box that we kind of put somewhere and we tell you if it works. For legacy reasons that I won't get into, the communication between those two was like a GraphQL-ish protocol. We very recently found that we switched that to like a JSON-based protocol, so more like HTTP over the wire. It like dramatically improves performance and also startup time. So the thing you're probably seeing with the like serverless or edge or kind of like function as a service areas is because of that. So if anyone's using Prisma and like kind of a less like serverless finger quotes kind of setup, do try out that JSON protocol. It's currently a preview feature. No, like use it as in production. We're very confident about that feature. So yeah, we got a blog post. I think it's like a 9x speed up roughly. So yeah, if you've had performance issues in the past, I get it. Try it out, please. It really mean the world to us. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
For show of hands, who here's heard of Prisma? Let's just like start with that. Sweet, that's like 90% of the room. And then who here has actually like used it in side project or like real project? Not real, paid project.
So much.
Why is Prisma cool? Tell me why.
Why is Prisma cool?
Yeah.
First, you have to accept that like ORMs are cool, and like I'm not gonna try and like convince you of that because like that starts flame wars. But like assuming we're like kind of on board of like ORMs are cool. Prisma gives you end-to-end type safety with like very little cost, almost no cost. So I'm a huge proponent of TypeScript. I'll live and die on that hill, but if you put Prisma into your project, you have extremely type-safe queries that go beyond like a standard query builder you might see. I'm not going to name names. I'm not Cat. And so you can take that idea of like type safety from like query back to response all the way through, and you can apply that to other areas. So we recently heard about this. I'm going to blank on his name of the project, but the idea of the project was to put an API that could be run on the front end. So you could run it like in React components and it could communicate to your Prisma like directly. So that means you can make Prisma queries from your front end page. Like that's completely type safe. That's really cool. I'm a big fan of, I'm a TypeScript fanboy, my bad. But yeah, it's the type nature of it all. It's safety above all else. Migrations, are built into the product as well, and migrations are always a pain. So we hope to like, with that product, it's not product, but with that feature, it's we encourage you to use it in the right way, so you don't like get into a database state where it's gone, and you have no way of recovering that data. Thank you for the question. Cool. Well, I will be around. Please say hello. Super excited to meet all of y'all and excited to chat. Thanks.
Yeah, so I shortened and cleverized the title slightly because it was how to run Remix on existing applications. So my name is Dustin Mihalik. I work at Indeed. Specifically, I work on a new product discovery team at Indeed, where we do a lot of really fast iterations on either new products or new features. So we just recently moved to Remix. We were using Python with Django before, which is very good for some things, but Remix lets us go really quickly. But we kind of moved to Remix on top of a stack that Indeed had. So learned a lot of things from doing that. And I've also done some other Remix integrations. So we're going to talk about how to make Remix work well with other applications. So out of the box, if you know a little bit about Remix, you start a new Remix application, there's a lot of places where it'll run, right? It'll run in a long running Node app, like an Express app. It'll run in a serverless Node environment, like a Lambda. It'll run a Dino. It'll run in Cloudflare, which is like a V8 isolate. It's Cloudflare is a whole different thing. But it runs there and works just fine. I love Cloudflare, so it's awesome. So there's a lot of places you run, but if you already have an existing application, maybe it's a Node application, maybe it's not. We'll talk about some non-Node applications in a second. But you want to use Remix with that application, either run it on the same server, run it next to, and kind of share routes. What does that look like? So you can migrate Remix, you can kind of integrate it and have them sit side by side. So there's a lot of different options. We start talking about how do you get Remix to work with the thing you have, which could be could be anything, right? Like it could be just, you've got to create React app, create a single page application. You've got an existing Express app, you know, you're running Django or something. And like your final state is, you know, it could be you want to run Remix, but you still want to call into Django API or something like that. So rather than like, here's a one size fits all, these are going to be like some little interesting places where you can hook into Remix and do something complicated, but will help you integrate Remix with your existing application. So a lot of this is actually like fundamentals of Remix. So there's what is Remix, and I didn't make this. Let's see, I may have trouble clicking on all these. Right, so there's this technical explanation page in the Remix docs, which is, I don't know, just a couple down on the pages. And if you want to do complicated things with Remix, this is very much worth a read. There we go. Cool. So there's on the technical explanation, they say there's 4 pieces, right? There's a compiler, server framework, browser framework, server-side handler. We're talking about each of these individually and how we can kind of plug into them. The compiler is fairly simple. Like it compiles both a server bundle and a browser bundle. And then the server-side handler is kind of how it hooks into all those different platforms. So there's a different server-side handler for all those things that I talked about before. So we're gonna start with the compiler. We're gonna start at the top, and we're gonna talk through a few things. So the Remix compiler it's based on ESBuild, but it doesn't expose any ESBuild stuff, right? So you can configure some stuff in Remix config, and they hide the fact that it's ESBuild, and they hide that config from you, which they do that so they can swap that out. Like if some new compiler comes around that's way faster, like they can just swap it out and everybody can upgrade. That's not always, using ESBuild is not always perfect, right? And as I mentioned before, the compiler builds both a server bundle and a browser bundle. And we'll kind of talk about what those end up being used for. So if you can't just use an out of the box ESBuild, so this is the first like, hey, if you want to move something into Remix, and you know, one example is using styled components. Styled components or any CSS and JS library doesn't always work super well out of the box with Remix, because Remix will do a server render, and then it'll do then it'll send that to the client. It'll do a client render when it hydrates. Then it'll compare those two, and it'll give you a hydration error because you know, it generates some GUID server side, it generates some GUID client side. Sometimes it doesn't work. There's some decent examples for how to get styled components to work, but if you run into issues where you need some sort of plugin to help you solve some of these issues, there are some ways to work around. There's some ways to work around just using ESBuild without any configuration. So one of these is ESBuild. Remix ESBuild override, which let me make this a little bit bigger. I just want to like this basically lets you it lets you in your Remix config define a function that says add this stuff to ESBuild. So if you're moving your application over, there's something that like I did this crazy thing with Webpack. I want to do it with ESBuild. There's a hook that you can hook into here to do that. Maybe it's not the best long-term thing. Like maybe long-term, you probably want to use the out of the box, because if Remix did ever swap in a compiler, or you know the new version upgrade happens, but this gives you a way to break out of what Remix kind of boxes you into. If ESBuild override doesn't work, one of the recommendations is actually patch package, which I don't know if everyone's familiar with patch package, I'll mention it here. If you're doing a lot of hacking on things, patch packages is particularly super useful. Basically what it does is you can build a diff of a library that you have in your node modules folder. And when you set up patch package, you can say, every time after npm install something, apply this diff to this package. And so, they say like, oh, if there's an open source library that you use and you make a merge request, but they're taking a long time to merge it in and get back to you, like you can make this change and you can have it immediately. That's the like responsible use of it. There's also, you can just modify any npm package you want to. So if you need to break out of ES build config, patch package is one way to do it. You can also, if you need to make changes to remix itself, you can do that with patch package as well. And if they're, obviously, if it was something that you thought that they would support, like obviously make a pull request and hopefully they'll support it. If it's something weird for your one-off case, it's probably not a good long-term solution again, but once again, if you have something, you're in the middle of a migration, something comes up, patch package is actually useful for that type of thing. There is under the Remix project in GitHub a Webpack demo. So if you had a Webpack compiled create React app application, there is actually, and I have not run it, there is a demo of how to take your Webpack bundle and serve it up in Remix. Once again, I think it's probably not a long-term solution. I've considered this for a couple different Webpack applications that I've written in the past, but I haven't tried it yet. But yeah, this is if you're really stuck in Webpack land, this is a good option. We're gonna jump from the top down to the bottom. It flowed a little bit better, but these are all just kind of random. So when we're talking about the server side handler, like this is like the very simplest Express application that you could create, Express with Remix application that you could create. So this create request handler comes from the adapter. We'll talk about adapters in just a sec. And then essentially you call create request handler, you pass in your build, and then you require that the built file that came out of the compiler. So this application doesn't support like hot reloading. You could like detect the file changes, and then you could blow away the required cache and re-require these files. But this is kind of where this is where your server side bundle gets included. So your server is running, I don't know, whatever native node or transpiled TypeScript or whatever you're running, and then you just require that bundle in, which will be important in just a sec. Right, so in general, what do adapters do? So that like create request handler, what is that responsible for? So I put native in quotes. Whatever server you're running, it takes whatever that request format is and turns it into a remix request, which is really like a standard node or browser. Like it's all standard requests. It passes in some context from your server, which we're going to talk about it in just a sec, and then it takes that response back and it turns it back into that native response, and it sends it back to your server. In doing so, it generally will, if your server has set headers or cookies, it'll merge those headers together. It's also responsible for handling the stream that comes back from Remix to send it. So the response bit is a little bit more complicated because it wants to work well with the server that it's running on top of. So passing context, this is where if you have an existing Node application and you're doing anything interesting in that Node application, you want to run Remix on top of it, context is super important. Basically, when you call your create request handler, you can also pass it a function that gets variables that you want to share from your server into the Remix application. So in this example, like if you've got a complicated config that's not just like environment variables, or maybe you got a way to load tiered config or secrets, and you don't want to do that in every request with Remix, you just instantiate your config once, and then you pass it into each request. And if you've got a database, you want to do database pooling, or like you want to keep some connections open, connect when your server starts, and you can pass that into Remix, and you've got some nice database connections. So the context that you can pass in to Remix, you can pass anything in. So yeah, I talked about tiered config, talked about databases. If you're running like Sentry or Datadog or some sort of observability thing, you can pass that in so that you get access to that in your loaders. And event emitter, you can pass in, I've done this, this is like a superpower. So you can pass in event emitter, and then you can emit events for, if I want to do logging, you can emit events to log. If you wanted to, if you want to do like a real-time chat application or whatever, you can actually have it event emits, and other Remix instances can pick them up, and you can server-side event render like a real-time feed or something like that. So the ability to pass like an event emitter into context unlocks a lot of really cool things. So this is I promised some like pitfalls or like do's and don'ts. This is actually like super niche and overly complicated, but it covers a few of the topics that we talked about so far. Basically, if you have in your server, this is type ORM, and type ORM, sorry, Prisma. Type ORM uses classes to like identify what entities you're talking about. So you say like, hey, I want I want a database manager. It's got photos in it, and then later you go to your data source and you say, hey, give me the manager for photos. You pass in the class, give me the manager for photos. You can instantiate the data source in your server, and you can pass it through in the context. Problem is, because your server is running like bare Node, and then this that's a Remix where you're receiving the context is actually a bundled version of all of your files. And it is bundled that photo entity as well. So they're actually different classes. So like 99% of the time, if you pass something across context, it works just fine and it's awesome. If you want to say like, are these two classes the same between something running in Remix and something running on your server, that might not actually work. So it's a weird pitfall. Most likely you're not going to run into it, but if you do, it ends up being difficult to debug. Yes, we talked about the merging of headers. This is like a real quick example. So the response comes back from Node, or it comes back from Express, and essentially it merges your headers. It merges your headers together. It loops through the ones that came back from Remix. It loops through the ones that you already had, and it merges those two together. So if you can set cookies in Remix, and you can set cookies in your Node application, and as long as you're not setting the same cookies, then that works just fine. if you do try and set the same cookies, one of them will win. And it kind of depends on this order of this for loop. So in general, you can set headers and cookies wherever you want, but just be aware that if you try to set the same headers or the same cookies, they may end up conflicting. This is another like, oh, it's kind of a niche pitfall, but depending on how your server, depending on how you generally return headers in your server, usually when I end up writing an Express application, I don't do streaming responses, right? Like I'll render my body and I'll put it on the body and I'll put some headers on there and I'll return it. The problem is you have to set headers before you start returning the body. And Remix by default is a streaming response. So if you add Remix to your existing application and you try and set some headers after Remix has completed, that won't work. And it probably doesn't come up very often. For me, it came up with sessions. So usually you're like, oh, we'll start a session, and then I want all the code is doing the rendering to be able to set stuff to the session, and then right when we send the response, I'll save the session as well. And so in this case, I was doing sessions outside of Remix. Remix would start streaming the response, and then I would set the session, and that wouldn't work. You don't get an error if you try and set a header after the body started streaming. The header just never shows up. So if you wanted to, and this breaks streaming in Remix, you can convert readable stream to string, and you can just wait for Remix to give you the whole response body, and then you just set it to context body, and then you can set whatever set of cookies or headers or whatever you want after Remix is done. And it kind of just depends on how big of an issue it would be to move all of your header setting to before Remix. So sessions, yes.
Sorry, real quick on the last slide. Does Remix stream even if you're not using defer, or only in the defer case?
It streams when you're not using defer as well. So even if it's just like a one-time render, it sets it as a streamable response. Yeah. And maybe it may differ depending on the adapter, but I know the Express and derivatives of Express adapters are all streaming responses. Sessions, I mentioned sessions. If you have sessions that you want to share with some other application, I don't know who's used a lot of sessions in Remix, but they've got the cookie storage and the memory one. There's nothing special about sessions. You create your session file yourself. So as long as you don't even have to implement all of these things because it's whatever. But if you want to make a session that looks like a Remix session, so all the docs kind of line up with what you're doing, as long as you do these 5 things, you can implement, you can share sessions with the rest of your application. So we had COA sessions, and we would just pass the session in on context, and then our session file just implemented these 5 things on top of the thing that came out of context. So you can share a session with another application if you want to. So now the thing I've been saving towards the end, because it's really complicated, is routing. So I rewrote this slide a few times because there's a lot of it depends. But But in general, if you're trying to use Remix with some other application, I would recommend that you use Remix as your like default route handler, because like you could like split routes, right? You could say, hey, you know, I've got a route file in Express and it handles some routes, and I've got my routes in Remix, and like I've got some like client side routes or something like that. It gets really difficult to map all those three, and Remix really wants to be the default. Like, I haven't found another route. I want to handle this. So I would recommend, if at all possible, to have Remix as your router, and then you can do some other tricks, which we'll cover in just a second. So if at all possible, Remix should be your router, and then potentially that falls back to something else. Yeah, I don't have any exact like pitfalls. I struggled with trying to split between routes for a couple different things, and I've talked to a few other people, and everyone kind of says like, yeah, it's probably best if Remix is just the router. So if there's like one thing when you bring Remix in to your application, if there's like the first thing that you need to figure out is how you can kind of make Remix the router for that application. So there's a couple of interesting things that you can do in that regard. Once again, this is a thing that I haven't done, but I'm really excited about. I think it's really cool. If you've got a single page application that uses React Router 6, which is like the newest version, you can take that application and you can copy it into a Remix directory. You can remove the browser router from it, and then you create this one line here, which is in the splat route, which we'll talk about from a second. And we could say export everything from my old application, and this upgrades a single page application into a Remix application, kind of magically. The documentation for this is called Migrating Your React Router App to Remix. And this is one of the longer documentation pages. So like, in theory, it's just make this one line and make this one change. Then there's a whole bunch of gotchas of, well, you also have to use, it has to use ES build if you're doing these other things. But in theory, this is really easy. And it's kind of cool because React Router folks are Remix folks, and so they somehow made this work. Yeah, this is one of the things I want to try, but I haven't had an opportunity to try. I'll comment because we're going to use it again in a second. This route /$TX, I think they call it the splat route. It's like a catch-all. So if Remix doesn't match any routes with all the routes in your folder, it'll always fall back to this, and you can read what the route is in here if you wanted to. But that's not true. The root route, like / route, that actually won't match this one. So if you really wanted to drop in, like, hey, I want to drop in my whole app, you would have to create an index that did this exact same thing. But otherwise, this should work. So this is like, I've got a single page app that I want that uses React Router, which I think most probably do. This is a good way to upgrade it. We're gonna go to like the other extreme, which is I have not a React app at all, right? I have a Java or Python or Rails application that I want to merge with my Remix application, or I want to migrate an old application to a new application. So the idea here is that you run Remix and you run your old application, and Remix, for any requests that it doesn't understand, it proxies to your old server. And so this is, once again, it's a splat route. So you can anything that it doesn't understand, it'll do that. So in this case, like I'm pretending they're running on the same server. It could be, you know, old app.yourcompany.com or whatever. But basically for your action and your loader, which handles Git and all the other methods, you take the request, you rewrite the URL, and then you fetch. And this is something I've learned from writing proxies recently. If you have a request object and you pass it into fetch, it just does that fetch with all the things on that request. So if you've got headers or the method or cookies or whatever it is, like this basically just passes through everything that was requested to your Remix application to your old application. So this basically, you let the two applications run side by side. You can, you know, add new routes to replace your existing application. You put some logging in here and say like, oh, I fell back to the other app. Slowly replace all the pages. And then when this thing stops logging, you just shut your old server down. I'm sure it's that easy. Yeah, so this is a way to, if you got two applications running, but you want the two same interfaces, you can do that. So I said, in general, you want Remix to be your like default handler. It doesn't have to be your everything handler. So there are, and in fact, it can't be if you want to do like static file hosting. But basically, there's potentially some routes that you would want to peel off and say like, I don't want these to go to Remix at all. And this is like a very Express specific thing, but Express for any middleware, you get this next function, which basically says like, hey, go to the next middleware that might be able to handle this request. And so if you don't call the next function, essentially it just short circuits. So for something like a health check, maybe you don't want to write your health check in Remix, or you don't want the tiny overhead of spinning up Remix. Like you peel off health check, static file hosting. If you want your Express app to also host static files, you would want to do the same thing because you don't want Remix to be hosting your static files. So yeah, as long as if you do the ordering right, you say you got health check first, and then create request handler is your like catch-all route. You can do that. So this is pretty much, I had one that I hid that was a little bit more complicated, weird stuff. So this is pretty much what I wanted to cover, which was there's a lot of places where you can hook in. If you had an existing application or you want to like use a bunch of existing middlewares to make Remix powerful, but sometimes you have to like dive into the internals of Remix to figure out how to do it, or you have to slightly go against their wishes by overriding ES build or something like that. But I think the overall goal is like if you can quickly move to Remix and you're building new stuff in Remix and you're slowly migrating your old stuff to Remix, I think that's better than stopping development in order to do a huge migration. So the idea here is, how can you get something up and running as quickly as possible on Remix and then slowly replace the pieces that you want to replace. Yeah, I think that's mostly it.
I just had a more high-level question. What led you to make the decision to jump from Python and Django to Remix?
Some of it's political. Right, like we as a company, you want to try and consolidate as much development into a certain number of languages and stacks.
Mm-hmm.
So the team that I was on was a Python team in like a 90% Java development shop and a 10% Node shop. the numbers might be slightly different, but right, like we were an outcast team doing Python development. So the question was like, oh, do we want to switch to Java or do we want to switch to Node? The Node for us was a fairly easy choice. But there's a stack to build on top of. Also say I didn't mention it, but we did a fairly long evaluation of Next.js as well, right? Next is the more popular framework right now by far, and the ability to pass in the context on the server was something you can't do in Next. So Next says like it can run on Express, but like it doesn't talk to Express. Like Express is just the server that there's a barrier, and if you're, so it runs on Express, but it doesn't integrate with Express. And it's mostly like, hey, it runs on Vercel. And so it was a little bit harder to like, hey, if we're not running on Vercel and we're running on these other Node stacks, like how do we make Node or how do we make Next work with the rest of our stuff? And it essentially ended up being like, if we wanted to use Next, and it still comes up at Indeed, like I hear probably once a week, like, why don't we just standardize on Next? Because that's like the thing that everyone's using. There's a lot of Node libraries that we'd have to rewrite to say like, these are Next middlewares now, and we'd be completely tied to Next. So that's the reason why we went with Remix, is because it integrated well with a stack that we mostly already had.
Right. And it allowed you to maybe be a little less loosely or a little more loosely committed to the framework in that regard when you came, because you said you had to be tied to Next if you wanted to write, you have to write middleware.
It's basic. Yeah, that's it. Like, so there's a couple of different ways that we render React at Indeed. Different teams do different ways of rendering React server side. And we've created another one with Remix, but the kind of the flexibility to maybe one of the other React renderers gets way better, way faster, like maybe we'll eventually move to that. But for us as a small team that wants to move fast, being on a third-party tool that's like well supported and well documented outside Indeed is super important for us. And Next would be good, but we would have to commit to rewriting is all, 30, 40 different libraries that we have and use.
What would some of those libraries be? I don't understand. What
Yeah, so some of this gets to the internals of Indeed, but like we've got a specific way that we store secrets, and secrets are shared into production applications. So we've got a library to like read secrets from another server. We've got our auth services. We actually run in.
Maybe I can clarify, what runtime do those libraries not support?
They are all Koa middlewares, which Koa is a variation of Express, slightly different Express. So there are some just Node libraries, and then there are some Koa specific middlewares. So all of the Koa middlewares would need to be rewritten to be Next middlewares. That's one of the reasons. I also like for Remix over Next, so it's a personal preference as well. And I was leading that project, but But yeah, there was a significant rewrite that would have to happen in order to.
For like the server adapters and stuff. Gotcha.
Yeah, so yeah, unfortunately, things weren't written as like generic node libraries. Things were written as either Koa or Express middlewares.
Remix is a really good job with that.
So I understand generally the advantages of Remix when you're all in with Remix, right? But how many of those advantages convey when you say, oh, let's use Remix for the router and use adapters to run our middlewares and run the backend or whatever else we need to do. How much do you actually realize out of Remix by doing essentially what it sounds like you did?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid question. So Remix doesn't have middlewares exactly, right? Like that's if I were to be critical of Remix, I would say like I think the middleware model is really nice. And so that's one advantage to also running on top of a system that has middleware is we can, I don't know, like I had to write something that was, we had to do some IP filtering or something, right? Like, oh, we want all requests to the server to be from this IP range. Like I slam that on a middleware real easy. And I could put it in like the route, like there's a way to do it, but it I don't know. For me, the middleware like makes more sense, and I have a little bit more confidence in it. It may just be that I've done it more. So I don't know. There's advantage of like being able to do like database pooling and some other things, but probably they could all be re-implemented as functions in Remix. I do think that, like I said, I do kind of like the middleware model. And so being able to instantiate some stuff when the server starts up and, keep some stuff in memory and then have all that pass into Remix with every request, I think that's nice. That's an advantage of running Remix on top of a server that you can kind of do whatever you want with. I don't have a good question, except once again, we don't have to rewrite a bunch of libraries. But I do think that there's some advantage to being able to like break out a remix and say like, I just want to do this as a middleware, and it doesn't run through the whole stack, which is kind of nice.
You said you had some like personal preferences about Remix. Are those like at all related to the hosting service that like isn't there?
Oh no, I'm not. No, I mean, I think Vercel's awesome.
I don't work at Vercel. Don't let the black tell you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's good. My personal preferences of Remix are, I don't know, if I'm an old guy, maybe the oldest in the room. Like this is how we used to do development, right? Like you write forms and then the forms would submit against the server and then it would process them and do some stuff. So I did React for a long time, and I like React and I like making JSON APIs and whatever. But Remix was kind of like, oh, this is like how the web used to work when we were writing PHP back in the day.
So it's nostalgia.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of nostalgia, but like it works well, right? I really like React. I like doing component-driven development. Like I think React is awesome, and so it gave me the like, oh, I can do React and I can do servers, kind of how I used to do servers, and it unfortunately feels like an improved version of PHP. Which actually, yeah.
Is the RSCs and the React server components stuff resonating with you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's not as big of a deal for me and what I do day to day. But I think it will be an improvement. I think, yeah, I think there's like streaming responses. I've started to do a lot of like AI and LLM development and doing a lot of like streaming response stuff. And so that Remix works pretty well for that too.
But just from like a parallels to PHP perspective.
Oh, I gave PHP as an example. I didn't do a huge amount of PHP, but I did a lot of Django. But yeah, I mean, I think the server component stuff is interesting, and I'd like to see how it goes.
I'm also skeptical. So
Yeah, well, it's hard to implement, and so we'll see if there's one server that ends up implementing it, or if it's multiple platforms that end up implementing it. We'll just have to see. Yeah, I mean, I tried to figure out why we picked Go at one point. And there's not a good answer. So, yeah. Cool. Any other questions or discussions? Cool.
Sweet. Round of applause. Thanks, Dustin. That was
Yeah, I'll
great.
share the slides with you and I'll send them out.
Perfect, thank you. In case you don't know, we do, I mean, you probably figured it out because I started recording this. We do host these recordings on YouTube. So in case you ever want to go back to something, you can find it there. And I always put all the slides and whatever links I can there too. So just so y'all are aware. This is the obligatory, I'm always looking for speaker slides. I actually have someone next month, so don't apply. No, I'm just kidding. Still apply. I always love to have, I've had enough people cancel to me that I always would like multiple people speaking if possible. Yeah, he's flying in from Phoenix, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, guest speaker. Yes, there you go. He said he's soft confirmed today. So anyway, that's a lot about something that's not even happening for a month. But yeah, if you ever want to do a talk, here's a bunch of ideas to get started with, but you can obviously do anything. You know, Dustin, that was like a pretty unique and really helpful and one I don't think we'd heard yet, which is really great. I still have like TRPC up, which is funny because that was like 6 months ago, but still someone talked about TRPC and integrating it with the Remix app. And it could pretty much be anything you want. This is really, you know, the sky's the limit. I mean, it still should probably be about web development. That is one requirement. So anyway, if you want to give a talk, there is a, you can just talk to me, or there is a, what do you call it, a form. Sweet, there you go, John. All right, yeah, hey, John, there is a form on the meetup, and if you fill that out, that's gonna be the easiest way for me to get back to you about that. Also, we have built a website at this point. I don't know if, you know, if you've been coming, you probably heard about this. If not, remixaustin.com is up. It's still relatively bare bones, so always looking for contributors and people who just want to play around. This is really just an opportunity for us to just build something together is the main reason we do it. And then maybe one day we can not use meetup.com because I don't like meetup. But it really helps tell people that we're here. So I don't think I can ever get away from it, but still it's fun to build a website together. Matt, you know, helped build the blog side of that. We only have one lonely little blog. So if you like creating content, yeah, you should write a post. So just reach out about that. And then finally, the next meetup. Ooh, I shouldn't have said next. That is confusing. The upcoming meetup is July 5th. I should have capitalized it. There actually is a next meetup tomorrow night, which is very funny. So if you like Next.js, you should also go to that. But I was really glad I switched to Wednesdays. That would have been super awkward. Like 3 people to come. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, our next meetup is on July 5th. So if you're not too hungover from celebrating our beating of the British, then you should come hang out again. And went away. And yeah, we'll have a great time talking to someone not from Texas, talking about remix stuff. So thanks again so much for coming. Feel free to stick around. I'll be here until 8. I don't know what time it is, and my screen. There you go. It's 7:30. So yeah, feel free to stick around. I'll be here till 8. If you want more food, or if you want to take food home, if there is food, feel free to do that. And then otherwise, yeah, just enjoy yourselves, and thanks everyone for coming.